I'm Sophia Margaret Sterling, 31 years old, and the first person in 4 generations to abandon the sacred Sterling medical dynasty. After surviving 2 grueling years of medical school that felt like slowly suffocating in golden chains, I made the unthinkable choice to pursue my true calling in business. You're a disgrace to everything this family stands for. Don't you dare show your face here again. My mother's words cut deeper than any surgical blade in her pristine operating theater. 6 years of exile followed, my name becoming forbidden in the illustrious Sterling medical empire. I built my legacy anyway, company by company, deal by deal, until my name commanded respect in boardrooms where titans of industry bowed to my vision. Then came the shimmering gold envelope with my sister's engagement soiree invitation. My father's clandestine act of rebellion. I convinced myself I was attending to shatter their illusions, to stand triumphant in the success they never dared imagine possible. What I didn't anticipate was Michael, my sister's celebrated fiancé, approaching me at the rehearsal garden party, his eyes wide with reverent recognition as he uttered those world-altering words, "M. Sterling. I had no idea you would grace us with your presence." The entire gathering fell silent as comprehension dawned on my sister's face, arrogance transforming into horror as her meticulously crafted narrative crumbled before the elite assembly. They had attempted to erase me from the Sterling dynasty. Now I would demonstrate that the daughter they discarded had become the empress they could never ignore. Just before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're captivated by these tales of triumph, ensure you're subscribed because tomorrow's exclusive episode is one you absolutely cannot miss. The golden envelope rested on my executive desk like a dormant volcano. My chief of staff, Marcus Wellington, had positioned it among my morning correspondence, likely assuming it was merely another corporate gala invitation. But I recognized the embossed Sterling family crest, a silver phoenix rising from flames, adorning the back flap. Immediately, 6 years of silence, and now this audacious summons, M. Sterling. Marcus's refined voice pierced my contemplation. The acquisition committee awaits your presence in the Sky boardroom. Momentarily, I murmured, my manicured fingers hovering over the envelope like a chess master contemplating the decisive move. I should have incinerated it unopened. Instead, I secured it within my desk's locked drawer and adjusted my tailored Armani blazer, suppressing the tsunami of memories threatening to engulf my composure. Later that evening, following a particularly ruthless merger negotiation that netted Sterling Industries another $50 million, I finally broke the seal. The engraved invitation exceeded my expectations in its opulence. Victoria Elizabeth Sterling and Michael James Harrison Blackwood requested the honor of my presence at their engagement celebration at the legendary Whitmore estate. What blindsided me was the trembling handwritten note from my father, concealed like contraband within the formal invitation. "Sophia, my darling daughter, please come home. I ache for you every day. Your mother and Victoria remain unaware of this correspondence. All my love, Papa." I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, the same Scottish whiskey my grandmother had savored during our clandestine business strategy sessions. Dame Margaret Sterling was the sole family member who championed my rebellion against the medical dynasty. "Sophia," she had proclaimed, "some souls are destined to heal bodies. But you, my fierce granddaughter, were born to heal entire worlds." My encrypted phone illuminated with a message from Alexandria, the only loyal confidante who weathered my transformation from disgraced daughter to corporate sovereign. Did the golden bullet arrive? The engagement invitation. "Tell me you're planning your grand entrance." I savored another sip of liquid amber before responding, deliberating my options. "Sophia Sterling, you must attend. Glide into that ballroom radiating power. CEO Sophia Sterling. Force them to swallow their venomous words whole." Easy counsel from someone absent during that catastrophic Christmas dinner 6 years prior, when Victoria had risen with champagne flute raised like a weapon, announcing to our assembled relatives that I was nothing but a delusional fantasist who would never contribute anything substantial to civilized society. I awakened my laptop and searched Michael Harrison, Blackwood Venture Capital Empire. Multiple results materialized, and I clicked his profile at Harrison, Blackwood Capital, a $2 billion venture fund specializing in revolutionary technologies. His photograph revealed a man with penetrating intelligence and magnetic confidence. Not the decorative trophy husband I anticipated Victoria would select. Scrolling through his investment portfolio, I froze upon discovering a familiar entity. He had spearheaded the $100 million funding round for Neuraltech Solutions 9 months ago, the identical startup whose strategic positioning I had orchestrated as their exclusive advisor. He had sat across mahogany tables from me during those grueling negotiations, complimenting my visionary thinking without recognizing my surname's significance. He remained oblivious to my identity beyond the boardroom. But revelation awaited. The following morning, I made pilgrimage to the cemetery, where my grandmother rested eternally. Her headstone stood modest compared to the grandiose Sterling family mausoleum nearby, a marble monument to medical achievement. I knelt, placing rare white orchids beside her grave. "I'm lost, grandmother," I whispered to the morning mist. Part of me yearns to witness Victoria's expression when she realizes what I've become. But another part fears I might destroy everything I've built. The autumn wind rustled through ancient oak trees. I recalled our final conversation in her hospital suite, her fingers like paper as she pressed a sealed envelope into my palm. "Open this when you're prepared to reclaim your birthright," she had whispered. That envelope had remained untouched in my private study for 4 years. Perhaps today marked the moment for revelation. That evening, I sat within my grandmother's former sanctuary, now my meditation room, and opened her final letter. Her elegant script danced across cream parchment with words of prophecy and unshakable faith. The concluding passage read, "When destiny calls you home, remember that true sovereignty isn't diminishing others. It's ascending while elevating everyone around you." I retrieved my phone and transmitted my RSVP directly to my father's personal email. 4 words that would reshape everything, expecting my triumphant return. Sophia. The day following my digital declaration, I journeyed to my grandmother's Victorian mansion, now my sanctuary. Though I had maintained its grandeur meticulously since inheriting it 4 years prior, I seldom ventured into her private study. Today felt cosmically different. The study retained her essence, lavender and leather, wisdom and rebellion. I traced my fingers along her business library's spines. My grandmother had been the family's first non-physician, having built a textile empire that revolutionized sustainable fashion. Too independent for their narrow minds, she would chuckle conspiratorially. Within her antique desk's secret compartment, I discovered a photo album never before revealed. The opening page displayed 2 young girls with matching smiles, holding tennis trophies triumphantly aloft. Victoria and me, ages 7 and 9. Before everything shattered. "You were my dearest friend," I whispered, caressing Victoria's innocent face in the photograph. We had been inseparable once, before our mother began including Victoria in surgical observations. Before the toxic comparisons commenced. Before Victoria realized that aligning herself with maternal expectations guaranteed approval and inheritance. I turned subsequent pages, witnessing our gradual estrangement. Christmas celebrations, summer adventures, graduation ceremonies. The progression was devastating. Each successive photograph captured us standing farther apart, Victoria's confidence blooming as my smile became increasingly guarded. By my Harvard Business School graduation, we barely touched in the family portrait. Our mother's hand resting possessively on Victoria's shoulder, while I stood isolated with my grandmother's supportive presence. The album concluded with my medical school white coat ceremony, the beginning of my rebellion. My grandmother had captured this moment, preserving my final act of family conformity. Our mother had radiated pride, finally witnessing both daughters embracing the Sterling medical legacy. Had she known what revolution was brewing, perhaps history would have unfolded differently. I closed the album and accessed my laptop's encrypted vault, where I preserved my private journals among strategic business plans. There, buried like buried treasure, lay my diary from medical school's 2nd year, when everything disintegrated spectacularly. October 25th assisted Rebecca in restructuring her family's failing restaurant empire today. 4 hours in the business library, and we discovered the financing strategy that preserved 3 generations of heritage. The euphoria on her face when the numbers aligned. That sensation surpassed any medical diagnosis I've ever witnessed. November 30th. Another cadaver dissection today. Everyone else appears mesmerized. I feel only revulsion. Dr. Morrison praised my surgeon's intuition. Mom will be ecstatic, but my soul rebels against this path. December 10th. Overheard Mom and Dr. Peterson conspiring about that malpractice lawsuit. They're protecting each other's reputations. Mom caught me eavesdropping and delivered tea look. The one declaring sterling reputation supersedes truth, justice, and humanity itself. The final entry remained my most agonizing memory. January 28th, tonight I detonated our family's foundation. Dad wept. Mom transformed into glacial stone, more terrifying than rage. Victoria denounced me as ungrateful, claiming I was destroying my birthright for frivolous rebellion. Only grandmother understood. She embraced me and whispered, "Golden cages remain cages, my darling Sophia." I closed my laptop and poured myself another whiskey. That night's memory still festered like an infected wound. My mother's voice, deadly quiet. "If you abandon medicine, you abandon this family's financial support." And my response, trembling yet resolute, "Then I shall forge my own empire." And I had. The subsequent 5 years became a montage of part-time employment, student loans, and cramped apartments with questionable amenities. I consumed instant noodles and generic cereals, while Victoria completed her surgical residency within our mother's prestigious department. I missed family celebrations because I was working retail at boutiques or serving tables at chain restaurants. When I attended obligatory family gatherings, conversations invariably spotlighted Victoria's achievements, punctuated by pointed silences where inquiries about my life should have flourished. By my business school graduation, I had nearly ceased caring. I sat among the audience at commencement, scanning for familiar faces and finding none, until I spotted my grandmother in the back row, supporting herself with her elegant walking stick, but beaming with fierce pride. "They're magnificent fools," she had declared afterward, embracing me tightly. "But someday they'll recognize what I've always known. You're destined for greatness beyond their comprehension." She didn't survive to witness my meteoric ascension through corporate ranks, but her faith never wavered. During her final illness, I would visit after boardroom battles, still wearing my power suits, sharing tales of my conquests. "You're gonna be legendary," she would whisper, her voice growing fainter with each passing day. The Christmas dinner that severed all remaining ties occurred 6 months after her death. I attended only because my father had pleaded desperately. He had promised an intimate family gathering. But I arrived to discover the mansion filled with extended relatives, colleagues from my mother's hospital, and Victoria's fellow surgeons. A carefully orchestrated humiliation. My mother had assembled everyone for the annual Sterling Medical Foundation donation ceremony. One by one, family members announced their generous contributions. When my turn arrived, I had to confess I couldn't match their 5-figure gifts. I was still drowning in student debt, barely affording rent as a junior business analyst. Victoria had risen then, resplendent in her designer gown, commanding the room's attention. I believe what my sister intends to say is that some family members contribute to humanity's betterment, while others merely consume resources. She had raised her crystal flute like a sword. To the Sterling legacy, may those truly worthy continue to uphold it. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. I surveyed the table, observing faces both embarrassed and smirking, none brave enough to defend me, and realized this toxicity would never change. I placed my napkin beside my untouched dessert, rose without uttering a word, and walked out. Only now, staring at the golden invitation on my desk, did I realize I had been fleeing ever since. The aroma of premium coffee filled my corner office as I reviewed quarterly domination reports. My walls displayed my Harvard MBA, numerous industry awards, and a photograph of my grandmother adjusting my first business suit. No family portraits, no sterling heirlooms. This empire was mine alone, built from ashes. At 31, I was still occasionally mistaken for an assistant, the youngest female CEO ever appointed in our industry sector, and certainly the only sterling to wear Armani instead of surgical scrubs. The journey had been merciless. After business school, I joined Morrison & Associates, a prestigious consulting firm renowned for accepting impossible challenges. My first day, senior partner Richard Morrison had glanced up from his mahogany desk and inquired, "Are you the new intern?" "No," I had responded, extending my hand with calculated confidence. "I'm Sophia Sterling, your new senior strategist." His expression had shifted from confusion to mortification. "Right, naturally, forgive me. It's just, you appear younger than anticipated." This became the first of countless such encounters. In boardrooms, executives often assumed I was recording minutes. In client meetings, questions were directed toward my male colleagues. I learned to speak with authority I didn't always possess, to dress impeccably, to never reveal uncertainty. My breakthrough materialized 2 years later with the Phoenix manufacturing case. A century-old corporation was hemorrhaging millions, and the board was contemplating bankruptcy. The opposing consulting team from a white shoe firm had smirked when I entered alone. Flying solo today, Sterling. Bold strategy. 3 weeks later, after I had uncovered systemic inefficiencies and developed a revolutionary restructuring blueprint through relentless analysis, their arrogance had evaporated. Phoenix not only survived but thrived, and my name graced Forbes' cover for the first time. I specialized in corporate resurrections thereafter, drawn to companies where I could dramatically impact people's livelihoods. The trauma of my fractured family provided insight into family businesses, succession planning, and organizational psychology. My grandmother's final gift arrived after her death, her historic Victorian mansion on Magnolia Street, the only family property my mother hadn't inherited. The accompanying letter read simply, "Build your legacy here." I had moved in with my minimal possessions, sleeping on an air mattress in the master suite until I could afford exquisite furnishings. Gradually, room by room, I had transformed it while preserving its character. Now, 6 years later, it was the sanctuary I had never experienced growing up in the cold, perfect Sterling mansion. Richard Morrison telephoned one afternoon with news that would change everything. "There's a CEO position opening at Sterling Industries. Ironically enough, you should apply." I had laughed. "Richard, that's my family's empire. They would never." "Sophia, listen carefully. You possess the right vision, the right experience, and frankly, they need someone who can resurrect what they've destroyed. At least consider it." The irony was exquisite. Sterling Industries, the textile empire my grandmother had built, had been slowly disintegrating under my uncle's mismanagement. The board was desperate for visionary leadership. The vetting process was gladiatorial. Background investigations, interviews, scrutiny of every deal I had ever orchestrated. I dreaded the inevitable family consultation, but it never materialized. Years later, I learned Richard had intervened, informing the board, "If you're evaluating Sophia's character, examine her track record, not her family complications." The day of my appointment, I stood alone at Sterling Industries headquarters, adjusting my new executive blazer. No family in the boardroom, but the room filled anyway. Clients I had rescued, colleagues who respected me, industry titans who had witnessed my dedication. Richard stood beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder as I took the oath. "I, Sophia Margaret Sterling, do solemnly swear." I had adopted my grandmother's name as my middle name, a private tribute she would have cherished. After 3 years as CEO, I had earned a reputation for innovation and integrity. The business press nicknamed me the Phoenix, for my ability to resurrect dying corporations. Competitors knew better than to underestimate Sterling Industries under my reign. One particular negotiation distinguished itself from the rest, not because of its complexity, but because of who represented the opposition. A brilliant venture capitalist, leading a $200 million investment in a revolutionary tech startup. He had presented his terms with passion and precision, citing strategies I had pioneered in similar deals. "Mr. Harrison Blackwood," I had said after his presentation, "your due diligence is exemplary." Michael had thanked me with professional respect, gathering his documents with efficient movements. Mems. Sterling is legendary for expecting thorough preparation. He had no concept of my identity beyond the business suit and corner office. No idea that the CEO he was negotiating with was his future sister-in-law. No idea that in 9 months he would stand in a garden at Whitmore Estate and unknowingly detonate a nuclear device at his own engagement soiree. Industry conferences were notorious for gossip. As I navigated the networking reception, I overheard 2 investment analysts whispering about that Harrison, Blackwood genius who impressed Sophia Sterling again. I slowed my pace, listening without appearing to eavesdrop. "He closed the Patterson acquisition too," one said. "Used Sterling's own methodology from the Morrison buyout. Intelligent move," the other replied. "Sterling appreciates when people study her playbook." I continued walking, a subtle smile playing at my lips. Michael Harrison, Blackwood was developing quite a reputation in our circles, and apparently, he had been analyzing my strategies with scholarly dedication. Perhaps he wasn't merely a convenient social connection for Victoria's ambitions after all. 2 weeks later, I encountered Michael directly at the annual Tech Innovation Summit. I was there because I believed in supporting breakthrough technologies. Presumably, he shared that philosophy. He stood across the ballroom, engaged in animated conversation with a senior partner from a firm I recognized. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his dark hair styled with understated elegance. Nothing like the flashy entrepreneurs Victoria had dated during college. I was contemplating a discreet exit when Michael looked up and noticed me. His face illuminated with recognition, and before I could retreat, he was approaching with confident strides. "Ms. Sterling," he said warmly. "I didn't expect to encounter you here." "Mr. Harrison Blackwood," I nodded graciously. "I try to support innovation when possible. Your keynote on sustainable business ecosystems last month was referenced in our investment committee meeting," he said, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "Your framework for evaluating long-term societal impact was revolutionary." "Thank you," I responded, uncertain how to handle praise from my sister's fiancé. "Your approach to the Patterson acquisition was equally brilliant." He beamed at the compliment. "That means everything coming from you. I've been studying your career since Harvard, actually. Your case study on family business transitions inspired me to focus on generational wealth transfer and legacy preservation." The irony was almost unbearable. I searched his face for any indication that he knew who I was beyond my professional role, but found none. Either Michael was an extraordinary actor, or Victoria had never shown him a family photograph, or perhaps never mentioned she had a sister at all. Just as I was struggling with how to respond, a colleague called his name from across the room. "I should go," he said apologetically, "but I hope we can discuss your strategic transformation methodology sometime, Ms. Sterling. I'd be honored to hear more about your approach to organizational renaissance." He hurried away, leaving me with my champagne and my whirling thoughts. What exactly had Victoria told him about her family? About me? Over the subsequent months, Michael appeared in my professional orbit twice more. Each time, his business acumen was exceptional, his manner professional and respectful. Outside conferences, at industry galas, he would greet me with deference but maintain appropriate distance. Never once did he indicate any knowledge of my connection to Victoria. My curiosity eventually overwhelmed my restraint. Using my corporate intelligence resources, I conducted a comprehensive background investigation on Michael James Harrison Blackwood. His record was impressive beyond measure. Graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. Worked at Goldman Sachs for 2 years, rejected partnership tracks at prestigious firms to establish his own venture capital empire. His investments focused on sustainable technology, medical innovations, and social impact ventures. Companies that transformed lives, not just generated profits. In other words, he was nothing like what I would have expected from Victoria's partner. My sister had always gravitated toward people who enhanced her image. Handsome, connected, wealthy, with prestigious family names and shallow souls, Michael seemed to care about substance over status, impact over image. At a business leadership summit in April, we ended up seated at the same table for the awards ceremony. After some general conversation with our tablemates, Michael turned to me directly with unusual vulnerability. "Ms. Sterling, may I seek your counsel on something deeply personal?" "Of course," I replied, intrigued by his sudden intimacy. "I'm getting engaged soon," he said, adjusting his vintage Rolex nervously. "And my fiancé's family is, well, they're extraordinarily traditional, accomplished. The kind of people who've had the same investment portfolios for 5 generations and consider new money vulgar." I nearly choked on my Dom P.A. Rignan. "That sounds challenging." "It is." He sighed heavily. "I come from a completely different universe. My parents are high school teachers. We saved for years just to afford family vacations to the coast." He smiled ruefully. "I'm terrified of saying or doing something that exposes me as an imposter." The universe's sense of humor was truly diabolical. Here was Michael, worried about fitting in with my family, asking me, the black sheep they had exiled, for advice on navigating our social labyrinth. In my experience, I said carefully, families like that care most about authenticity. Be yourself, not who you think they want you to be. He looked visibly relieved. That's actually profoundly helpful. My fiancé keeps providing these complex instructions about how to behave, who to impress, what topics to avoid. It's emotionally exhausting. Sounds like she's the one who's nervous. I observed, wondering what Victoria had told him about the illustrious Sterlings. She is, he admitted. She talks about her family like they're European royalty, but then becomes evasive when I ask specific questions, like she's concealing dark secrets. He suddenly looked embarrassed. I apologize. I shouldn't be burdening you with personal matters. It's perfectly fine, I assured him, fighting the overwhelming urge to reveal everything. Engagement stress affects everyone differently. As he thanked me and turned to speak with another table-mate, I wondered what Victoria would say if she knew her fiancé had just confided in the sister she had written off as a catastrophic failure. 3 weeks before the engagement soirée, my father called. I nearly declined when I saw his number, but something compelled me to answer. Sophia. His voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. You're actually coming to the celebration. I confirmed my attendance. I replied carefully. Yes, I received your email. He paused meaningfully. It's just, your mother doesn't know I extended the invitation. Neither does Victoria. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted by the family's eternal conspiracies. So you want me to stay away after all? No. The force of his response surprised me. No, Sophia, I desperately want you there. I've missed you terribly. It's just, it might be shocking for them. Good, I said before I could stop myself. He was quiet for a moment. Sophia, please don't attend seeking vengeance. I'm not, I said truthfully. But I'm not attending to pretend everything's wonderful either. Fair enough, he conceded. Will you have dinner with me next week? Just the two of us. The request caught me off guard. In 6 years, my father had made minimal effort to maintain contact. Occasional birthday cards, generic holiday greetings. But something in his voice sounded different now. Determined, desperate. All right, I agreed. Tuesday at Giovanni's, 7:30, the following Tuesday. I arrived at the restaurant early, choosing a private corner table with strategic sight lines. My father appeared precisely on time, looking both familiar and strange. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and his usually perfect posture seemed slightly diminished. Sophia, he said, reaching for my hands across the table. You look absolutely magnificent. Thank you, I replied, allowing the brief contact before withdrawing my hands. You look well. An awkward silence fell as we studied our menus like battle plans. After ordering, my father took a deep breath and transformed before my eyes. I've been following your career obsessively, he said quietly. The Sterling Industries transformation, the Forbes cover stories, the industry recognition. I've read everything I could find. I stared at him, speechless. Your mother doesn't know, he continued with surprising strength. She still can't accept that you're not a doctor. That's been abundantly clear for 6 years, Dad. I finished for him, unable to keep the edge from my voice. He flinched but nodded. Yes. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Sophia. Extraordinarily proud of what you've accomplished entirely on your own. Is it really on my own when grandmother left me her house and helped fund my final semester? I asked, unable to resist the barb. Your grandmother believed in you, he said simply. As she should have. As we all should have. The sommelier arrived with our wine, providing a moment for me to collect myself. My father had never spoken to me like this before. Not when I'd left medical school. Not when I'd graduated business school. Not even after I became CEO. Why now, Dad? I asked finally. He toyed with his napkin like a nervous child. Michael, he said, Victoria's fiancé gay. He's not what any of us expected. That made 2 of us. How so? He asks penetrating questions about everything. My father gave a small, amused smile. About the family history, traditions. Even that hideous portrait of great-grandfather in the dining room. He's noticed there are significant gaps in our family stories. And what does Victoria tell him about me? I couldn't help asking. My father's expression darkened. She tells people you couldn't handle medical school, that you had a nervous breakdown and disappeared. The familiar rage flared, but I pushed it down with practiced control. And Mom, she doesn't correct her. He looked genuinely ashamed. Neither did I until recently. I raised an eyebrow. Recently, Michael found an old photo album. You were in several pictures. He asked who you were. My father took a large swallow of wine. I told him the truth, that you're a successful CEO now, and that we don't speak much because of family disagreements. I imagined Michael's confusion, trying to reconcile the successful CEO with Victoria's story of the failure who couldn't cut it. No wonder he'd seemed so interested in my business strategies yet oblivious to our connection. Does he know I'll be at the soiree? I asked. No. My father admitted. Victoria still believes you won't come. She told everyone you declined, so I'll be the surprise guest, I said dryly. Our food arrived, and we ate in contemplative silence for several minutes before my father spoke again. Sophia, there's something else you should know. He set down his fork with ceremony. Your mother had a health scare last month. Nothing life-threatening, stress-related cardiac episodes, but it changed something fundamental between us. How so? I told her I've been miserable about how we've treated you, that I want my daughter back in my life. His voice cracked slightly. She didn't agree exactly, but she didn't forbid it either. That's unprecedented progress for her. I considered his words, unsure how to feel. For years I'd nursed my anger against both my parents equally. My mother for her glacial rejection, my father for his cowardly acceptance of it. Now, he was extending an olive branch, however belated. I'm not seeking a dramatic emotional reunion, I said finally. But I won't hide who I am or what I've accomplished either. He nodded with evident relief. That's entirely fair. As we finished our meal, my father reached into his briefcase and extracted a small velvet jewelry box. This was your grandmother's, he said, sliding it across the table. Victoria has been wearing it. But it was always meant for you. I opened the box to find my grandmother's Art Deco diamond necklace, the one she'd always promised would be mine someday. The platinum setting was engraved with her initials, Mess, and inside was a small photo of her with me at my business school graduation. How did you get this? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. I took it from Victoria's jewelry collection, he admitted, a flash of defiance in his eyes. She never appreciated what it meant. I closed my fingers around the necklace, feeling its familiar weight against my palm. Thank you, Sophia, my father said as we prepared to leave. Whatever happens at this celebration, just know that not everyone in this family feels the same way about you. I drove home that night with my grandmother's necklace in my purse, and my father's words echoing in my mind. As I pulled into my circular driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from Alexandria. Wardrobe consultation tomorrow. No negotiation. If you're facing the executioner, you're doing it in something that stops traffic. I smiled despite myself. Maybe she was right. If I was walking back into the lion's den, I might as well look absolutely devastating doing it. The week before the engagement soiree, I alternated between determination and doubt, packing and unpacking my overnight case, rehearsing calm responses to potential provocations. The night before I was scheduled to drive to Whitmore Estate, I sat in my grandmother's favorite wingback chair, holding her necklace and rereading her final letter. Sometimes the most treacherous road leads to the most spectacular view, she had written. Tomorrow I would discover if she was prophetic. The winding road to Whitmore Estate was exactly as I remembered from my privileged childhood. Towering evergreens creating cathedral shadows across the pavement, the wrought iron gates standing open in elegant welcome. As I drove through in my midnight blue Bentley, my hands tightened on the leather steering wheel. The last time I'd been here was for my grandmother's 85th birthday celebration, 5 years before her death. Victoria had spent that entire evening regaling her medical school colleagues with tales of a complex surgery she'd observed, while I refilled champagne flutes and pretended not to hear my mother explaining to relatives that I was still exploring my options. Now I returned, not as a confused dropout, but as CEO Sophia Sterling. My luxury vehicle looked understated next to the fleet of Rolls, Royces and Maseratis parked along the circular drive, but I didn't care. I touched my grandmother's necklace beneath my silk blouse, drawing strength from its presence, before stepping onto the Italian marble. The estate's gardens were in magnificent bloom, transformed with crystal chandeliers, sophisticated floral arrangements, and strings of fairy lights for tomorrow's celebration. I heard voices and laughter emanating from the east terrace where the cocktail reception would unfold. Sophia. My father materialized from a side path, wearing an expensive midnight tuxedo that matched his anxious eyes. You actually came. I said I would. I accepted his hesitant embrace, noting how he glanced nervously toward the terrace. Has anyone noticed I'm here yet? No, he whispered. Your mother's inside with the event coordinator. Victoria is with the florist by the ceremony pavilion. He squeezed my arm gently. You look absolutely breathtaking, darling. Alexandria had insisted on the midnight blue silk gown, custom Valentino that cost more than most people's cars. It screams power and sophistication without trying, she had declared. I'd paired it with my grandmother's diamonds, and heels just high enough to feel commanding without sacrificing grace. CEO instinct: never wear shoes you can't walk authoritatively in while changing the world. Sophia Sterling, is that really you? My cousin Jennifer approached, her expression a cocktail of shock and fascination. Father said you weren't attending. Plans evolved, I said with a smile that could have cut glass. Well, this is extraordinary. She adjusted her designer clutch nervously. Are Victoria and Aunt Patricia aware? Not yet, I replied, savoring her discomfort like vintage wine. More relatives noticed me as we made our way toward the terrace. Aunt Caroline nearly dropped her martini. Uncle David executed a comical double take. Two of my mother's hospital colleagues whispered behind manicured hands like conspiring socialites. I kept my chin elevated regally, acknowledging their stunned greetings with the gracious nods of visiting royalty. Ahead, I could observe Victoria directing a server with imperial gestures, commanding the champagne fountain arrangement like a general positioning troops. She appeared unchanged, elegant in that polished, untouchable way, her movements radiating confidence and entitlement. I inhaled deeply, preparing for the confrontation that would reshape our family's destiny. But it was Michael I spotted first. He stood slightly apart from the wedding party, checking something on his phone with the focused intensity of a man managing billion-dollar investments. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his commanding presence, his dark hair styled with understated sophistication. When he looked up and saw me, his face transformed with genuine delight, the expression of a man encountering his professional idol unexpectedly. "M. Sterling," he called, approaching with confident strides that commanded attention. The conversations around us quieted like a symphony reaching its crescendo as heads turned to observe this unexpected encounter. Michael approached with the slight respectful bow I'd noticed at business events, a charming habit that spoke to his old-world upbringing. "I had absolutely no idea you would honor us with your presence." His voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent terrace, each word dropping like stones into still water. Victoria whipped around with the violence of a startled predator, her expression cycling from confusion to shock to absolute horror in the span of heartbeats. Our eyes locked over Michael's shoulder like dueling pistols at dawn. "Mem Sterling is a family connection," Michael continued, oblivious to the nuclear tension crackling through the evening air like electricity before a storm. "Not exactly," I said quietly, my voice carrying the authority of boardrooms where I'd conquered titans, keeping my gaze fixed on my sister like a laser targeting system. Victoria strode toward us, her face draining of color like water from a broken vessel. "Sophia," she said flatly, my name emerging like a curse word. "This is unexpected. Is it?" I replied with the cool precision of a chess grandmaster making the winning move. I confirmed my attendance. Michael looked between us with growing confusion, his brilliant mind clearly processing the impossible equation before him. "You two know each other." "You could say that," Victoria answered, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Sophia is my daughter," my mother interjected, emerging from the house like an avenging angel, moving to stand beside me with surprising solidarity. "Victoria's sister." Michael's mouth fell open with the perfect shock of a man watching his universe reorganize itself. "Sister." He turned to Victoria with the slow, terrible movement of inevitable revelation. "You told me your sister couldn't handle medical school and disappeared into obscurity. That she was..." He stopped himself with the reflexes of a gentleman, but we all heard the unspoken word hanging in the perfumed air like a sword of Damocles. "Disappointing. I didn't disappear," I said with the calm of a woman who had conquered corporate empires and built dynasties from nothing. "I became a CEO." "Wait." Michael's eyes widened as understanding dawned like sunrise over his aristocratic features. "Mem Sterling is your sister, the same as Sterling, who's been featured on Fortune's cover 3 times. Who transformed Sterling Industries from bankruptcy to a billion-dollar empire." The silence that followed felt heavier than any boardroom tension I'd ever commanded. Family members and party guests had abandoned all pretense of not listening, forming a loose circle around us like spectators at a gladiatorial contest where reputations would die. Victoria attempted a dismissive laugh that emerged more like the sound of breaking crystal. Sophia always did have unconventional definitions of success. Unconventional? Michael's voice rose with the righteous indignation of a man discovering he'd been systematically deceived. Sterling's business strategies are taught at Wharton. Her corporate transformation methodologies have been adopted by Fortune 500 companies across 3 continents. Yes. Well, Victoria shifted uncomfortably, her perfect composure beginning to crack like fine porcelain under pressure. I suppose business has its place, though it's hardly. Hardly what? Victoria. I interrupted, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, like a judge delivering a verdict that would change everything. Hardly saving lives. Because that's what you were about to say, isn't it? That's always been the family gospel. Unless you're healing bodies, you're not contributing anything meaningful to humanity. My mother chose that moment to emerge from the house like destiny itself, stopping short when she saw me. For an instant, I was 12 years old again, awaiting her judgment like a prisoner before the bench. Then I remembered the boardrooms I commanded daily, the companies I'd resurrected, the thousands of lives I'd transformed through my decisions. Mom, Victoria called, a note of desperation creeping into her voice like water through cracks in a dam. Did you know about this? My mother approached slowly, her movements carrying the weight of years and regret. She looked older than I remembered, her silver hair perfectly styled, but her eyes holding new vulnerability. Your father mentioned the possibility, she said carefully, her voice carrying the measured tone of a surgeon discussing a delicate procedure. Her eyes assessed me with clinical precision that softened into something resembling wonder. You look extraordinary, Sophia. Thank you. I replied, neither warm nor cold, my voice carrying the neutrality of a CEO in sensitive negotiations. I am extraordinary. Michael was still staring at Victoria, his expression hardening like molten steel cooling into an unbreakable blade. You told me your sister was a troubled dropout. You never once mentioned she was Sophia Sterling. I didn't think it was relevant. Victoria muttered, her usual commanding presence reduced to defensive mumbling. Not relevant. Michael's voice rose again, carrying across the terrace like thunder. Victoria, I've been studying her case studies since graduate school. I've implemented her strategies in my own firm. I've cited her work in presentations to heads of state and Fortune 500 CEOs. A ripple of whispers spread through the onlookers like wildfire through dry grass. Someone, I think it was Uncle David, let out a low whistle of disbelief. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately, my mother suggested, looking around at the growing audience with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to managing scandal. Why? I asked with the directness that had made me legendary in business circles. Victoria didn't feel the need for privacy when she announced to everyone at Christmas dinner that I was nothing but a selfish dreamer who would never contribute anything meaningful to civilized society. Victoria flinched as if I'd struck her. That was 6 years ago, Sophia. And you did walk away from a prestigious medical career that most people would sacrifice everything to achieve. I walked away from a path that wasn't mine. I corrected her with the patience of a teacher, explaining basic concepts to a struggling student. Just like grandmother did when she chose to build her business empire instead of following family medical expectations. That was completely different. My mother interjected with the automatic defensiveness of someone whose worldview was being challenged. Was it? I countered with the logical precision that had made me legendary in negotiations. Or was it only acceptable because she proved everyone wrong so spectacularly that even this family couldn't ignore her success? My mother had no answer for that devastating logic. Michael, however, wasn't finished. He turned to Victoria with movements so deliberate they seemed choreographed by fate itself, slowly removing his engagement ring with the ceremony of a man performing a sacred ritual. I need considerable time to think, he said quietly, placing the ring in her palm with the finality of a judge's gavel. This isn't just about your sister, Victoria. It's about you lying to me about who you are, who your family is, what your values actually represent. He looked at me with something approaching reverence, then back at her with disappointment, so profound it was almost tangible. If you could lie about something so fundamental, what else haven't you told me? What other truths have you decided aren't relevant to our future? Without waiting for an answer that would never come, He walked away toward the guest parking area with the dignity of a man who had discovered his worth. Victoria stared after him with the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Then at the ring in her hand that had suddenly become a symbol of everything she'd lost. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked me with the bitterness of defeat, her voice carrying the petulant tone of a child whose toys had been taken away. "You've managed to destroy my engagement before it even became a marriage." "I didn't do this, Victoria," I said with the quiet authority of absolute truth. "Your own dishonesty accomplished this destruction. I simply existed in the space you tried to erase." She stormed off toward the main house with the dramatic flair of someone who had never learned to lose gracefully, leaving me standing with my parents and a circle of stunned relatives who looked like they'd witnessed a natural disaster. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my mother spoke with remarkable composure, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing crises. "I think," she said with the measured calm of a surgeon in an emergency, "we could all use some refreshment. Dinner will be served in 30 minutes." As the crowd dispersed with the awkward shuffle of people who had witnessed family drama they'd be discussing for years, my mother remained, studying me with an unreadable expression that reminded me of our shared genetics. "You've done extraordinarily well for yourself," she said finally, the closest thing to approval I'd heard from her in a decade of silence. "Yes," I agreed with the simple confidence of someone who had conquered worlds. "I have." The dinner that evening was a masterclass in awkward silences and forced conversation, like a badly scripted play where everyone had forgotten their lines. Victoria didn't appear until the soup course, her face set in grim lines that could have been carved from marble. Michael remained absent entirely, his ghost haunting every empty chair and unspoken conversation. I sat between my father and Aunt Caroline, fielding questions about my fascinating career choice from relatives who suddenly seemed hypnotically interested in the business world they'd previously dismissed as beneath their medical attention. "So you actually control an entire corporation?" Uncle David asked with the wonder of someone discovering a new species, as if I'd admitted to taming dragons in my spare time. "When the situation requires it," I replied, sipping my wine with the measured grace of someone accustomed to being underestimated. Though much of my focus involves strategic visioning, market transformation, and organizational psychology, Sophia specialized in corporate resurrections before becoming CEO. My father added with unexpected pride that surprised everyone, including himself. She was renowned for discovering solutions where others saw only inevitable failure. I glanced at him, startled by his specific knowledge and the obvious pride in his voice. Perhaps he really had been following my career with the dedication of a scholar studying his favorite subject. Victoria picked at her food with the listless movements of someone who had lost their appetite for more than just dinner, barely participating in the conversation until one of her medical school friends, a resident named Sarah, who clearly hadn't read the room, made an ill-advised attempt to lighten the mood with the social awareness of a bull in a china shop. Well, who would have predicted this plot twist? She raised her glass with a grin that would have been infectious under different circumstances. The black sheep became the golden goose. "Please don't," I said quietly. But several guests had already lifted their glasses, in a toast that felt more like a funeral for Victoria's carefully constructed narrative. Victoria set down her fork with a clatter that rang through the dining room like a warning bell. "She's not a golden goose," she said with the cold precision of a surgeon making an incision. "She quit when medicine became too demanding. Let's not pretend abandoning your responsibilities is something worthy of celebration." The table fell silent again with the weight of a tomb. I counted to 10 in my head, a technique I used when facing particularly obtuse board members who confused volume with intelligence. "I didn't quit because medicine was too demanding, Victoria," I said with the even tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a struggling child. "I quit because it wasn't my calling. There's a profound difference between inability and incompatibility. A calling." She scoffed with the dismissive tone of someone whose worldview was crumbling. "What does that even mean? Medicine is the Sterling family legacy, stretching back 4 generations. A legacy you guarded with the jealousy of a dragon protecting treasure." I observed with the clinical detachment of a therapist analyzing patient behavior. Remember when we were children and I scored higher on that business simulation game? You didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, recognizing the uncomfortable truth in my words. Victoria had always needed to be the best, the favorite, the one destined for greatness. Treating our childhood like a zero, some game where my success threatened her identity. That's completely absurd. She protested with the desperation of someone whose carefully constructed self-image was dissolving. I was supportive of you until you threw everything away for a frivolous whim. An unexpected voice joined our psychological duel. My mother's. That's not entirely accurate. Victoria, she said quietly, her words falling like individual stones into still water. You were competitive with your sister from a very early age. Your father, and I probably encouraged that dynamic more than we should have. Victoria stared at our mother with the shock of someone whose foundational beliefs had just been challenged by their most trusted authority figure. What are you saying? That it's my fault she abandoned medicine? No. My mother replied with the measured precision of someone who had spent considerable time in self-reflection. I'm saying we all played roles in what transpired, including me. She looked at me directly with eyes that held decades of regret, perhaps especially me. The admission hung in the air like incense, as surprising to me as to everyone else witnessing this unexpected moment of maternal accountability. My mother, Dr. Patricia Sterling, who had never admitted error in her professional or personal life, was acknowledging her contribution to our family's fracture, with the courage of someone who had finally found her moral center. One of the guests cleared his throat with the awkwardness of someone who had stumbled into a family therapy session. Maybe we should discuss something else. The weather forecast for tomorrow looks absolutely perfect. If there is a tomorrow's celebration, muttered one of Victoria's bridesmaids, apparently unaware that whispers carry in marble dining rooms. There will be. Victoria insisted with the desperate certainty of someone trying to convince herself as much as others, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes like candlelight in wind. Michael just needs time to process everything. This is all overwhelming for him. I excused myself shortly after the main course, needing air and space to process the evening's revelations. The night was warm and clear, stars visible above the estate's manicured gardens like scattered diamonds. I found a stone bench near a reflecting pool, my grandmother's favorite spot for contemplation, and sat down, fingering her necklace through my silk blouse. I thought I might find you here, said a familiar voice behind me. Michael emerged from the shadows like a character from a romantic novel, still in his tuxedo but with his bow tie loosened, and his usually perfect hair slightly disabled by evening breezes and emotional turmoil. Your father mentioned it was a sacred place for your grandmother. It was. I confirmed, making room for him on the bench with the grace of someone accustomed to unexpected negotiations. How are you managing this chaos? He sat down with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of dissolved dreams. Honestly, I don't know. 24 hours ago, I thought I understood my life, my future, my fiancé. Now everything I believed has been revealed as carefully constructed fiction. I'm sorry. I offered with genuine sincerity. It wasn't my intention to disrupt your engagement or your happiness. It wasn't you, he said with absolute certainty, his voice carrying the firmness of someone who had reached unshakable conclusions. It was Victoria's deception, her systematic lies, her complete inability to be honest about something so fundamental. He shook his head with the bewilderment of someone whose reality had been completely reconstructed. I can't believe I didn't recognize the patterns. The way she always redirected conversations about her family, the missing photographs, the inconsistencies in her stories that I explained away because I was too infatuated to see clearly. He paused, turning to face me with the intensity of someone seeking absolute truth. May I ask you something that requires complete honesty, Sophia? I corrected gently, dropping the formal business relationship we'd maintained. And yes, ask me anything. What was she like growing up? I mean, was she always so driven, so competitive, so desperate for approval that she would sacrifice truth itself? I considered my answer with the care of someone who understood that words could heal or wound depending on their precision. Yes, but she was also capable of extraordinary kindness. When I had pneumonia in 5th grade, She brought me homework and read to me for hours. When kids at school mocked my business presentations, she defended me with fierce loyalty. I looked across the dark garden, seeing our shared childhood in the shadows and moonlight. Victoria isn't a villain, Michael. She's profoundly human, flawed, desperate to be the perfect daughter, even when it meant forcing me into the role of the imperfect disappointment. Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing my words with the careful attention of someone making life-altering decisions. I've spent 2 years with a woman who couldn't be honest about something as fundamental as her relationship with her sister. What does that say about our potential for building a life based on truth and mutual respect? I had no easy answers for him, recognizing that some questions could only be answered by the people living inside them. We sat in companionable silence until he stood to leave, his movements carrying the weight of someone who had aged years in a single evening. "Thank you," he said with genuine gratitude, "for your honesty, and for your brilliance in transforming Patterson Industries. That restructuring saved my client's family legacy and 300 jobs." He walked away toward the guest parking area, leaving me to contemplate how many lives I'd touched without realizing their personal significance, and how many Victoria had saved in operating rooms I would never see. Perhaps we'd both found our authentic callings after all. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my guest suite, awakening me earlier than I would have preferred. After a restless night filled with dreams of boardrooms and operating theaters, I dressed in casual elegance and slipped outside for a contemplative walk, hoping to clear my mind before facing the day's inevitable emotional complexity. The estate grounds were pristine and quiet, staff not yet arrived to prepare for the now uncertain engagement celebration. I followed a familiar path down to the small gazebo, where my grandmother had taught me chess strategy and life philosophy, surprised to find Michael sitting on the stone steps, still wearing yesterday's clothes like a man who had wrestled with demons all night. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, joining him with the companionable ease of two people who had shared unexpected truth. He shook his head with the wariness of someone who had spent hours in painful self-examination. "I've been out here since 3 a.m, thinking about everything." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning mist rise from the pond's surface like ghosts of possibilities that would never materialize. Finally, Michael spoke with the careful deliberation of someone who had reached difficult conclusions. "I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest, even if the truth is painful. What kind of woman is your sister, really? Beneath all the performance and perfectionism." I considered my answer with the care of someone who understood that my words would influence major life decisions. Ambitious, proud, desperate for approval, especially from our mother, sometimes entitled and controlling, but also brilliant, dedicated to her patients, capable of extraordinary compassion when it matters most. "Is she the woman I thought I was marrying?" He pressed with the intensity of someone whose future hung in the balance. "Only you can answer that," I replied with the wisdom of someone who had learned that truth was often more complex than simple judgments. "But I will say this. People are rarely entirely good or entirely evil. Victoria created a narrative about me that was unfair and destructive. That was wrong, but it emerged from her own insecurities and desperate need for approval, not from malicious intent." Michael twisted his hands in his lap with the nervous energy of someone processing life-changing realizations. "She came to my suite last night. We talked until sunrise. And," I prompted gently, "she admitted everything. How she'd built herself up by diminishing you. How she'd been terrified I would think less of her if I knew her sister was more successful, more accomplished, more respected in her field than she was in hers." He sighed with the exhaustion of emotional revelation. She seemed genuinely remorseful. For the first time since I've known her, she was completely vulnerable, without pretense or performance. "That doesn't sound like the Victoria I know," I admitted with genuine surprise. "People can change," he said with the hope of someone who wanted to believe in redemption. "If they want it badly enough, and if the consequences of not changing become unbearable." "Do you believe she wants to change badly enough?" I asked with the directness that had made me legendary in business negotiations. "I think so." He nodded slowly. "But I also told her that our engagement must be postponed indefinitely. We need to rebuild trust from the foundation up. And that's going to require complete honesty, genuine vulnerability, and probably professional counseling. Before I could respond, a commotion rose from the direction of the main house. A staff member was running toward us with the urgency of someone bearing serious news. "Mr. Harrison Blackwood, Miss Sterling. It's Dr. Sterling, the elder one. She's collapsed in her study." We rushed to the house, finding my mother seated in a leather chair in the library. My father hovering anxiously beside her, while a young man I recognized as one of Victoria's medical colleagues checked her vital signs with professional efficiency. "It's just stress, related cardiac irregularities," my mother insisted, though her face was pale and her breathing slightly labored. "No need for theatrical emergency responses. We've called an ambulance regardless," my father said with uncharacteristic firmness. "Patricia, please don't argue with medical protocol." Victoria burst into the room, carrying her medical bag, instantly transforming from emotionally devastated woman into competent physician. "What happened?" she demanded, immediately switching into the focused intensity of someone whose professional training had taken control. "Your mother experienced chest pain and shortness of breath while reviewing patient files," the colleague explained with clinical precision. "Her pulse is slightly irregular but stable. Blood pressure elevated but not dangerously so." Victoria knelt beside our mother, taking over the examination with the practiced efficiency that had made her a respected surgeon. I stood back, feeling suddenly irrelevant in this medical crisis, until my mother's eyes found mine over Victoria's shoulder with surprising intensity. "Sophia," she called with unexpected strength. "Come here, please. I need to speak with you." Surprised by the request, I approached the chair. My mother reached out and took my hand in hers, the first time she had initiated physical contact in 6 years of estrangement. I may not have another opportunity to say this. She began with the urgency of someone who had finally found her courage. "Don't be melodramatic, Mom," Victoria interrupted with the brisk efficiency of someone managing a medical situation. "Your vitals are stabilizing already. Be quiet." "Victoria," my mother said with unexpected sharpness that surprised everyone in the room. "I need to speak to your sister, and I've waited far too long already." Her eyes, so similar to my own, held mine with unwavering intensity. "I was wrong, Sophia. Profoundly, systematically wrong to force you into a path that wasn't yours. Wrong to withdraw my support when you found the courage to follow your authentic calling." I stared at her, speechless with shock at this unexpected emotional revolution. "Your grandmother warned me I would regret my choices," she continued with gathering strength. "The day after that horrible Christmas dinner, she came to my office and said, 'You're going to spend years asking for her forgiveness someday, Patricia. I just pray you find the courage before it's too late.'" She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I hope it's not too late for us to rebuild what I destroyed through my own fear and rigidity." The ambulance arrived before I could formulate any response, their professional efficiency filling the room with equipment and urgent competence. As the paramedics prepared to transport my mother for cardiac evaluation, Victoria pulled me aside with movements that seemed almost involuntary. "This doesn't change everything between us," she said, but the usual sharp edge was notably absent from her voice. "Doesn't it?" I countered gently. She ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair, a gesture so familiar from our childhood that it almost made me smile with unexpected nostalgia. "I don't know how to do this, Sophia. How to be wrong about something so fundamental to my identity. It gets easier with practice." I assured her with the wisdom of someone who had learned to live with uncertainty and mistake. "Trust me, I make decisions I later question constantly. It's part of being human rather than perfect." A ghost of a smile crossed her face, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her in years. Always so confident, even when admitting uncertainty. "Hardly confident," I admitted with rare vulnerability. "But I've learned to live with ambiguity and imperfection. It's part of building something real, rather than something that just looks impressive." My father approached with worry etched in every line of his face. "They're taking your mother to Memorial Hospital for comprehensive cardiac evaluation. I'm accompanying her." He hesitated with obvious internal struggle. "Will you both come?" Together, Victoria and I exchanged a glance. Decades of competition and accumulated hurt flowing between us like an electric current, but also the faint memory of being allies once. long ago before the family dynamics had poisoned our sisterhood. "I'll drive us," I offered, surprising myself with the gesture. The 3 hours we spent in the hospital waiting room were awkward, but not hostile. Like former enemies discovering they had more in common than they'd remembered. Victoria explained the cardiac tests they were conducting on our mother with the clear precision of someone translating medical complexity into understandable terms. I helped my father navigate the insurance documentation with my business expertise, making quick work of the bureaucratic complexity that often overwhelmed families in crisis. When the cardiologist emerged to report that my mother was stable and would be discharged with medication adjustments and lifestyle recommendations, we shared a moment of collective relief that felt like the first genuine family emotion we'd experienced in years. That evening, back at Whitmore Estate, I found my father in the family study, surrounded by photo albums I'd never seen before. "I've kept these hidden for years," he confessed with the shame of someone admitting to a secret addiction, showing me a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings about my business achievements. "Your mother," it was easier not to remind her of what she was missing. "And now?" I asked, genuinely curious about his emotional evolution. "Now I'm finished hiding from the truth," he said with newfound determination that seemed to strengthen his entire posture. "I've missed too much of your life already, Sophia. I've been a coward when I should have been a father." As I turned the pages of his secret scrapbook, I was stunned by its comprehensiveness. Articles, photographs, even printed copies of interviews and speeches I'd given to industry organizations. All this time, I'd assumed he'd been completely disinterested in my career, when in reality he'd been following it with the dedication of a devoted fan. "Why didn't you ever tell me you were paying attention?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion I hadn't expected. He looked down with the shame of someone confessing a fundamental failure. "I wasn't brave enough to stand up to your mother or to Victoria. I chose the path of least resistance when I should have chosen my daughter." He met my eyes again with newfound resolve. "But seeing you walk in yesterday, so confident, so accomplished, so completely self-possessed. I've never been prouder of anyone in my entire life, Sophia. Never." Later that night, a soft knock came at my guest room door. Victoria stood in the hallway, holding something precious in her hands with the reverence of someone returning stolen treasure. "Grandmother's necklace," she said, extending it toward me with obvious reluctance. "Dade told me he reclaimed it from my jewelry collection. But the truth is, I knew it was meant for you. I kept it after the funeral because I was angry, jealous of the relationship you had with her that I never could achieve." I accepted the necklace, running my thumb over the familiar diamonds that caught the hallway light like captured stars. "She loved you too, Victoria. Differently perhaps, but genuinely. Not the way she loved you," Victoria said without the bitterness I'd expected. "She saw something in you that the rest of us missed completely. Some spark of greatness that we were too threatened to recognize." She paused at my doorway, seeming to gather courage for something important. "Michael has decided to postpone our engagement indefinitely. He says we need time to rebuild trust and discover who we really are underneath all our performances." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it completely. She shrugged with surprising grace. "It's better than calling it off entirely, which is probably what I deserve for building our relationship on systematic deception." She turned to go, then stopped with the hesitation of someone about to risk vulnerability. "The Fortune 500 Leadership Award. Is it true you're being considered?" "It's been discussed," I acknowledged carefully. "Nothing official has been announced." "You deserve it completely," she said simply. The first professional compliment she'd ever given me, delivered without qualification or reservation. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't even complete reconciliation. But as I closed my door and placed my grandmother's necklace on the antique dresser, I thought perhaps it was the beginning of something authentic between us, for the first time in our adult lives. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO Sophia Sterling. 1 year after the engagement celebration that transformed everything, I walked onto the stage at the International Business Leadership Summit to accept the Fortune 500 Visionary Award. The crystal trophy felt substantial in my hands, but the sense of purpose that had driven me here remained unchanged, only deeper, richer, more connected to something larger than individual achievement. My assistant had handed me the day's schedule as I'd settled into my expanded office that morning. First appointment. I'd announced to my team. Harrison, Blackwood Capital Partnership meeting. Michael entered the boardroom with the confident bearing of a man who had discovered his authentic self through trial by fire. His consulting firm, established 10 months earlier with seed funding from an anonymous donor. My father, though Michael remained unaware of this detail, had quickly gained recognition for innovative approaches to ethical venture capital and sustainable business development. Sophia, he began, our relationship now built on mutual professional respect and genuine friendship rather than family obligation. After the postponed engagement had evolved into an amicable separation, Michael and I had maintained a connection based on shared values and complementary expertise. The meeting proceeded smoothly, both sides presenting proposals that could revolutionize how venture capital approached social responsibility. During a brief break, Michael approached my desk with the easy familiarity of someone who had become a trusted ally. I wanted to inform you before you heard it elsewhere, he said with careful consideration. Victoria called me last week, my eyebrow raised with involuntary curiosity. She's returning from her 3rd medical mission in Central America next month, he explained. She sounds fundamentally different, more grounded, less concerned with appearances, genuinely committed to service over status. After the non-engagement and our mother's health crisis, Victoria had shocked everyone by taking an extended sabbatical from her prestigious surgical position to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders in some of the world's most challenging medical environments. The sister I'd known would never have sacrificed career advancement for humanitarian work that offered no social recognition. Perhaps people really could transform when confronted with the consequences of their choices. Are you considering reconciliation? I left the question deliberately open-ended. Romantically, no, he said with absolute certainty. That chapter closed permanently when trust was shattered. But I think we might be able to build a friendship based on who we've become rather than who we were when we were lying to ourselves and each other. My assistant announced the end of our break, and Michael returned to his seat. I watched him organize his notes with the methodical precision of someone who had learned to value substance over style, remembering how he'd once been so worried about impressing the Sterling family. Now he stood confidently on his own principles, building enterprises that created meaningful change rather than just impressive returns. That evening, I joined my parents for dinner at their home, a monthly tradition we'd established gradually over the past year. The grand Sterling mansion felt fundamentally different now, less like a museum to medical achievement, and more like a home where people actually lived and loved and forgave each other's imperfections. Sophia, my mother greeted me at the door, her embrace still tentative but genuine. Her health scare had humbled her in ways that decades of professional success had never managed, forcing her to confront what truly mattered when faced with mortality. How was the board presentation today? My father asked as we settled around the kitchen island. No longer in the formal dining room, but in the sun-filled space my mother had claimed as her own, after deciding that family meals should feel like family meals rather than corporate negotiations. Transformative, I replied with satisfaction. Michael's proposal for ethical venture capital could revolutionize how we approach social responsibility in business development. That reminds me, my mother said, her voice carrying new confidence. I have a medical ethics question I wanted your business perspective on. A colleague is dealing with a situation involving patient confidentiality and potential institutional liability. As she outlined the complex case, I marveled at how fundamentally our relationship had evolved. A year ago, my mother would never have considered my opinion on anything remotely connected to her medical world. Now, she regularly sought my strategic perspective on administrative challenges facing her department, recognizing that leadership principles transcended professional boundaries. After dinner, my father pulled me into his study, now shared space filled with both medical journals and business publications, family photographs that included me alongside Victoria for the first time in years. I have significant news, he said, excitement brightening his entire demeanor. I've been invited to join the board of the Sterling Foundation. Apparently, someone spoke very highly of my commitment to family values and ethical leadership. He gave me a knowing look filled with gratitude and pride. I smiled with practiced innocence. I can't imagine who might have recommended you. I know it was you, he said, squeezing my hand with the warmth of someone who had learned to express emotions he'd suppressed for decades. Thank you for believing I could become better than I was, even when I didn't believe it myself. As I drove home that night, my phone rang with Victoria's name appearing on the screen. A regular occurrence now despite our cautious progress toward genuine sisterhood. Sophia, she said when I answered, her voice carrying new depth earned through months of working in conditions that stripped away every pretense. Do you have a moment? Always, I replied, activating the speaker system. How was Guatemala? Humbling beyond description, she admitted with the honesty of someone who had discovered her limitations and found strength in acknowledging them. It turns out I'm not the greatest surgeon in the world when I'm working in field hospitals with minimal equipment and maximum need. She paused, and I could hear the sounds of an airport in the background. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I'm considering a fundamental change in specialization, focusing on developing surgical techniques specifically for resource-limited environments. That sounds profoundly meaningful, I said, genuinely impressed by her evolution. It is, but it would mean stepping away from the career trajectory Mom always envisioned for me. Taking a research and teaching position instead of pursuing the department chairmanship that's been promised to me. I understood immediately the courage this decision would require. And you want to know how to tell her. You've had extensive practice disappointing parental expectations, Victoria said, then quickly added with newfound self-awareness, I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I meant you have experience choosing authentic purpose over family pressure. I know what you meant. I assured her with the patience of someone who had learned that healing relationships required generous interpretation. Here's my advice: tell her directly, explain your reasoning clearly, and then give her time to process. She's not the same woman she was 6 years ago, Victoria. None of us are. Thank you, she said with simple gratitude. By the way, I heard about the international leadership recognition. Congratulations on being selected. It's still just a nomination at this point. I demurred, though my name had indeed been chosen for the prestigious award. Well, grandmother would be absolutely triumphant, Victoria said with warmth that held no trace of competition or resentment. She always predicted you'd make history on your own terms. Later that week, I visited the cemetery, kneeling beside my grandmother's grave with a copy of my award acceptance speech. The spring breeze rustled the pages as I placed them against her simple headstone. You were absolutely right about making history, grandmother, I said softly to the morning air. But you were wrong about one crucial thing. I didn't prove them wrong about me. I proved you right about what was possible when someone believes in you completely. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Coffee with Victoria, 10:00 a.m. Our monthly meeting, established after months of cautious text exchanges, had become a cherished tradition. Not quite the closeness we'd shared as children, but something new and authentic we were building together, based on who we'd become rather than who we'd been forced to be. In my car, I opened the glove compartment and carefully removed the envelope containing my grandmother's final letter. I'd read it so many times the creases were becoming fragile, but certain passages still resonated with particular power. Sophia, my darling granddaughter, remember that true power isn't in making others feel inferior. It's in standing tall while lifting everyone around you. The family legacy isn't medicine or business or any particular profession. It's integrity. It's courage. It's doing what's right even when it's difficult and lonely. By that measure, my fierce girl, you are the greatest Sterling of them all. I tucked the letter away with reverence, started my car, and drove toward a future I had built decision by decision, choice by choice, forgiveness by forgiveness. Not the destiny my mother had planned for me, or even the one I had originally imagined for myself, but one I had constructed with my own hands and heart and uncompromising vision. My own legacy, written in my own words, lived in my own truth. I touched my grandmother's necklace through my silk blouse and smiled with the deep satisfaction of someone who had finally come home to herself. The view from here was absolutely magnificent. What would you do if the family that rejected you suddenly had to confront your extraordinary success? Could you find the strength to forgive, Or would you choose the satisfaction of vindication? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of transformation, redemption, and reclaiming your authentic power resonated with your own journey, please like and subscribe for more tales of triumph over adversity. New stories of courage and transformation posted every week.